Hello, everyone, and welcome to Director Watch, an Awards Watch podcast that attempts to get inside the mind of cinema's greatest auteurs, explore what drives them, and maybe we'll go on a few unrelated tangents along the way. I'm Ryan McQuade, the executive editor here at AwardsWatch. Joining me, as always, is my co-host, Jay Ledbetter.
And today, as much as I don't want to, I have to be the Daniel Day-Lewis, the Daniel Plainview to the Paul Thomas Anderson series' Eli Sunday. It will be a bloody, violent end to this movie series. Yeah. And I'm excited to talk about some awards for Paul Thomas Anderson, some rankings, all that good stuff. Gamifying movie criticism. Doesn't get better than that.
Well, we had a big budget for today, which for our first awards that we've ever done for a series, we were going to reenact the 1980s opening with Rob Lowe and Snow White. And unfortunately, copyright Disney, not enough background dancers. We couldn't get all that together, Jay. It was a real.
I thought that was in the public domain.
It really is, but it's also.
We wanted to use the imagery of the Disney.
Yeah, Rob Lowe and AI. It's really weird. But we did ring in somebody with us here to talk about all these awards and talk about PTA and wrap up this series. And I could not think of a better person to talk about the Parent Teacher Association than the head of content at The Ringer and the host of the Big Picture podcast, Mr. Sean Fennessey. Sean, welcome to Director Watch.
Thank you so much. I'm flattered to be here and delighted to be dressed as Snow White for this discussion. So thank you for having me.
It's really great that you brought your tap dancing shoes. And
yes, always, honestly. I've always got them on.
You got to. And
it was just rude of us to not tell you that we canceled that in advance.
Yeah.
Is this not on video?
I mean, it is for our enjoyment and maybe blackmail purposes. But no, Sean, thank you so much for being here and talking about PTA. I mean, you and I kind of talked briefly at Telluride this past year about the idea of doing this, but I know because I'm a listener of your show, and so is Jay. We know how much you love PTA, and it kind of felt like at the end of this journey of talking about my favorite film director to talk about also your favorite film director and give out some awards and talk about the man in general. But, opening thesis statement to every one of these episodes has been essentially, why is PTA your guy? And Sean, I know you probably have given that out before, but maybe it's changed since you've done some rewatches or stuff, or maybe time changes, but why is he your guy, or why do you connect with him so much?
Yeah, the older I get, the less I know, right? I think I have always enjoyed his blend of kind of Gen X virtuosity with a deep emotional appreciation for 70s American cinema. Like that, it really feels like the ultimate collision of those two things. And he has all the style, an incredible sense of humor, and is a very kind of family-oriented filmmaker. That most of his movies are about kind of real life or found families, often found families. And so I really relate to that. And I think he also has something that was very appealing to me when I was a kid, which is that he had a persona as a public figure that was kind of manic, fast talking, smarter than everyone, larger than life. He seemed kind of zooted at all times. He was dating a singer songwriter who I was a really big fan of. Like he represented something that I thought was cool. And, over time, I think as he's mellowed, as I've mellowed, I've started to understand him in different ways in his work over the years. But he was very attractive to me as a director figure when I was very young. And so I latched on to him pretty quickly when I was a teenager and really haven't let go as I've kind of discovered the different shapes of life. And I think he has too.
Yeah. Jay, you got anything? What was the first film of his that you saw? Did you see Boogie Nights in theaters? Was that the first one that you saw? Did you see Hard Eight? Was it at home? Was it in a theater?
Yeah, I was trying to remember this. I mean, I certainly read about Hard Eight playing Sundance as a teenager, probably in Entertainment Weekly. And the way that it was described was close to the kind of movies that I liked. Character studies about illicit worlds, gambling, ne'er-do-well characters, exciting cast of like a series of that guys, like no actual movie stars. Like if you think back at the time, sort of like Philip Baker Hall, John C. Reilly, Samuel L. Jackson, and then I guess Gwyneth Paltrow being a major movie star. But I probably didn't see that movie until after I actually saw Boogie Nights. I'm sure Boogie Nights was the first film of his that I saw. I don't believe I saw it in theaters. I believe I saw it at home. But when I saw it at home, I then proceeded to watch it at home like nonstop for 10 years. I've said before, it's kind of a nightlight for me. I would watch it over and over and over again. And because I got so interested in Boogie Nights, it led to very closely following the lead up to Magnolia. So that period between like 96 and 2000, I was fully synced with the PTA experience.
Yeah,
absolutely PTA pilled.
Yes.
Yeah. And then once you're kind of in, then it's for us, I mean, as we've been talking about all the films, you then go back to them, and I think they have different meanings as time goes on. And I think like even with something like Boogie Nights, you obviously you go in because of the selling point, but then you attach yourself to different characters or smaller moments that mean more rather than just the bigger ideas. And that's what I love about PTA films is you can go in for the big stuff, but really the small stuff is what I always have been, at least on these rewatches, been really gravitating towards. And then he still kind of surprises me in a lot of ways. Like when rewatching Inherent Vice, I loved that movie when it came out, but now I'm like, wow, this actually really works, and it's not as confusing as people think it is, and it's really funny, but it's also really sad in a lot of ways. And maybe that's the one. I mean, we have Brian Tallarico, we have Robert Daniels on, and how much they love something like Punch Drunk Love, and how that's evolved, and how that has a bit of a following as well, and people and that's their number one. So their number ones are always different. We're going to do our rankings later with you, Sean. But it's always interesting because I think every time I do the full PTA rewatch from start to his latest, which is Licorice Pizza right now, it always changes, but the admiration for him always grows. Jay, I don't know about you, but like some of these movies just grew and grew more and more, and some of the problems for him even are little nitpicks. They just kind of go away when you're watching them.
Yeah, I mean, this was the big revelation of this rewatch for me. It had honestly been a while since I'd watched some of these movies, and There Will Be Blood is the most important movie of my life, no matter whatever else comes along. I wouldn't be a weirdo without There Will Be Blood, right? It was kind of the one that made me think about movies differently.
You and thousands of others across the podcast
exactly,
myself included.
And on this rewatch, I really was just like, I don't give Paul Thomas Anderson enough credit, which is a weird conclusion to come to. It's just like, I had always kind of said, Paul Thomas Anderson's my guy, but maybe it's not like my guy, where you want to have like, yeah, but have you seen like Sam Peckinpah movies? Because less people have seen Sam Peckinpah movies. So you can kind of speak as more of an expert compared to other people when it comes to Sam Peckinpah movies. And this time when you rewatch the movies, you're just like, why would I ever watch other movies when you're watching him? And I mean, he's the best. I've underrated him somehow over the years.
Well, I think he's he's on the Mount Rushmore of like the 90s film bro canon, right? And so I think he of course becomes like an object of obsession for a lot of film fans of a certain age, usually between the ages of like 25 and 50. Usually men. Not always, but usually. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Like his early movies are kind of like young, dumb, and full of cum movies, and his kind of middle period is him like kind of sorting it out and figuring out his life and trying to discover like what is love. And then as he gets older, it's kind of like, what is masculinity? What is America? Like what are these big themes that he's kind of grappling with? And then he kind of circles back to actually what is love? What is contentment? What is family? What is connection? So like as you get older, if you're in that cohort, his movies continue to resonate in different ways, which is sort of what you're saying, Ryan. I think the thing that's been interesting to me, though, as I've gotten older and spent more time kind of listening to him talk about films and his own films, is that he's not this like wild, dangerous trailblazer. He's just in like a lineage of, frankly, like old Hollywood filmmakers. Like his participation in the TCM situation this past year, his work with the Film Foundation, his desire to kind of talk about the work of George Stevens or Frank Capra. Like he really understands those filmmakers in clear ways. He feels very connected to them. And if you view those films, you see that his films are kind of in a lineage of The Best Years of Our Lives, or, Giant, or, films like from the American 40s and 50s, these stories of big, bold characters and big, bold settings. Like, that is kind of what he does. He does big ensembles with big, deep metaphorical power and also like lots of emotionality. So he's not like a weird hipster, and even though people are like, oh, The Master is such a strange movie, or Inherent Vice is an inscrutable piece of work, like, he's actually a much more of a traditionalist than I think people assume he is, based on the like energy and provocation that the early work set off.
And he's very explicitly a gateway to Robert Altman, Scorsese, all these guys. And that was another reason I kind of underrated him, is because I did my full Altman watch after Paul Thomas Anderson. And so it was like, I saw Shortcuts and I was like, I mean, I haven't seen Magnolia in a while, but Jesus Christ, right? Is that a carbon copy of Shortcuts?
It's only like 9 years later too. It's not like so much later. So, I think Nashville was probably like the movie that imprinted on him the most deeply. But you're right. Shortcuts is like obviously a huge inspiration. And, ultimately, eventually, like PTA was kind of co-directing A Prairie Home Companion when Altman was kind of at the end. And so he closed the loop on that. And he constantly, early PTA was so good about talking about how much he loved Altman, and especially Jonathan Demme. He's the one who kind of like raised the rafters on Demme as like one of the great American film artists.
Yeah, that's true.
And I remember vividly, even in the commentary of Boogie Nights as a kid, that was probably the first movie commentary that I listened to. Him almost opening the film by being like, I ripped this shot off from Scorsese. And feeling like, oh, wow, you're allowed to say that. And you're allowed to make us understand that movie history is a lineage of homage, that it is a series of events that are like interconnected and that they have a relationship to each other. And so connection points and convergences are kind of what interest me most with filmmakers and films, and what one film reminds you of another film and why they're related to each other thematically or technically. And he's a great subject for that concept.
Mm-hmm. And how they're different, because the Shortcuts Magnolia thing is like, Altman has that innate cynicism that Magnolia doesn't really have. That's a movie about kind of resetting and finding hope in this cynical world, whereas the cataclysmic event in Shortcuts is truly like, here are these terrible people getting let off the hook for their horrific actions. So, it's similar and different.
Yeah, I mean, like, Sean, you're talking about his evolution as a filmmaker is fascinating, because his last two films have really been more personal than anything that he's done really before. You're talking about a movie like Phantom Thread he made from an idea of being sick and his wife taking care of him, to then Licorice Pizza. He had all the kids in the house and he needed to make a movie. He needed to do something. And so it springs an idea to, you're working with your family, and his family's been sprinkled throughout the last 3 or 4 of his films. And yeah, I mean, we read a lot about Scorsese and we hear a lot about Spielberg and Scorsese working towards film restoration and whatnot. And, right next to those two is somebody like Christopher Nolan at a bigger scale as well. But then also is Paul Thomas Anderson and Tarantino, who came up from that, the video store rental sort of age in the 90s. And the idea of, like, I think it was at the TCM Film Festival. It was, I think, The Searchers, or maybe it was Rio Bravo that was screening, and the Q&A afterwards is with Spielberg and Paul Thomas Anderson. And that's who he is. Like you're saying, he's modeling himself after. He is a torchbearer to carry on to the next generation. Once that generation that he loves so much, reveres so much, and has been inspired by so much, once they're gone, he's the one that's going to take on that next one. And he's not talking like Tarantino with an expiration date. He still has many, many stories to tell. And that's sort of fascinating because, we hear about, one of our categories we're going to talk about later is, the actor we want to see in a PTA movie, but he's been talking about working with bigger actors and working with bigger studios again. And, it's also interesting that he's not the most box office known, director, but in terms of in Hollywood and in the zeitgeist, his movies have been able to punch through culturally enough to leave their imprint. Like a movie like There Will Be Blood, we talk about it as being one of the greatest films probably of the last of this century. And that movie didn't nearly make the box office of probably any of the top movies that year. But what it did when we talked about it on that show was culturally, you knew what I drink your milkshake, or you knew about,
SNL skit.
An SNL skit or something like it. He's able to just always find his way in to stay relevant, which is something you have to do in order to then get, a $40 million movie about a man making dresses made in this world. And so, he's had comments about streaming, and he's kind of indifferent about it, but he's one of the last breeds that we have left that doesn't have to go down that avenue just yet, which is quite refreshing, but it's also very rarefied air, and you're in a very privileged space. So what do you do with that power? You have to then make sure that, in a lot of ways, he's trying to use his film restoration in a lot of ways as his power. And I think that that's what Spielberg and Scorsese have done so well. And that's what I revere about him so much. I mean, like, I think for my money, he is, of his generation, the best, because he makes the most challenging films, and he does it on not necessarily the most grand spectacle, but also they're just movies that I go back to both out of comfort but out of curiosity. Like a movie like The Master, I can watch over and over again. I am still picking up things. Even Magnolia. That's another movie that you can still. All of it is so much, and
just like hop on the 3-hour movie about how depressing the modern world is.
Exactly, and start singing midway through, and I think you'll be all right. You know what I mean? But it's suffice to say, I think he's brilliant, and I think we all think he's pretty brilliant.
I think he's good.
Yeah, he's pretty good at his job, right, Jay? I guess
he's pretty good. His box office history is actually kind of hysterical. His highest grossing domestic is $40 million. And that's way higher than number 2. And it just feels like he's been more financially successful than that. But
is that Phantom Thread?
No, There Will Be Blood. Phantom Thread made a whopping $21 million at the domestic box office.
Hey, well, what'd you looky there?
I think he's a much consumed at home filmmaker.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think he's someone who a lot of his biggest movies were discovered later, and is also just deeply revered by critics and by his peers. Actors in particular desperately want to be in his movies. And I think he makes really fun projects, like he doesn't make stuffy, prestigious Oscar bait, and he doesn't make obscure movies either. His movies are pretty legible, even when they're strange. Like The Master, on the one hand, feels very peculiar when you're watching it, but on paper, it's just about a wayward guy after the war in America trying to find his way, and he stumbles into a cult. It's not like it's not Stan Brakhage, you know what I mean? Like,
as we all do,
right?
Yeah.
So I think because they're so legible, but also so grand a lot of the time, there are movies that you may not be racing out to the theater to check them out when they open, but they have a replayability that people seem to enjoy.
Absolutely.
And you want to talk about a guy who squeezes every dollar out of his freaking budget. PTA, his movies look 2-3 times more expensive than they actually are. So
and he works with the best actors on the planet every single time. They love coming back with him. He's got a stable of actors early on, but then he's
early on they was cheap because he was just using guys from Altman movies.
Yeah, he was just like, you still using the check from that Altman movie? Okay, cool. You can just come and do like 20 minutes over here. Let's talk about some awards. Let's do some awards. We have some categories for the listeners out there. Sean's got them. Jay's got them. I got them. We got our own personal picks. Here are the categories: best male performance, best female performance, his best direction, his best screenplay, the best needle drop. All the films are eligible for that. Best scene, which is probably the hardest one, I think. We have the PTA Acting Muse Award, who's his best muse. Jay, you came up with this one, the PTA MVS, the most valuable collaborator, which is different than actor. And then the last
MVS, one, most valuable collaborator.
Yes.
Is the S silent?
I'm sorry. MVC. Sorry. Okay. It's been a long day. We have had a long day. And then of course, the actor that you most like to see in a PTA movie. After we're all done with these awards, we'll do our PTA rankings. Sean, why don't you kick it off with best male performance? We're going to start off from the scratch.
This is really obvious and boring, but it's Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood, right? I don't really.
I mean, is it?
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Daniel Plainview is, I think, will ultimately be his signature creation character wise. And I've been on a lot of pods talking about There Will Be Blood in My Life, so I'm not sure how much you need to hear me say, but I think the way that Daniel Day-Lewis kind of turned himself over to that part, as he so often does, the voice, the facial hair, the particular gait and posture that he carries in the movie, the depth, the sonorous depth of his line delivery, the sense of humor that he brings to a fairly ridiculous part, but also the real gravity that he has as an actor. There's kind of heartbreaking aspects to it. There's kind of insidious, scary aspects to it. There is something even a little bit sweet about the way that he cares about or doesn't care about his son.
Yeah.
It's the masterclass this century in kind of movie star period piece acting to me. So it was kind of an obvious pick for me. This is the first thing I answered and wrote down.
Yeah. Jay?
Yeah, I mean that is the obvious answer, but Sean, as a creator of content, I'm sure you can appreciate we can't just all three talk about Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, Zach, what do you got for me?
So I'm going to bring the heat here with the first pick. And I mean, the real answer to this is it's like a 50-way tie for first place, but because Paul Thomas Anderson, again, maybe his greatest ability is his ability to work with actors. Name an actor that he's worked with, his best performance is probably in a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which is kind of his number one superpower. And there are some great ones, but the one that kind of stuck with me on these rewatches, Don Cheadle in Boogie Nights for me is just like, he's incredible in that movie. He squeezes every ounce of humor and empathy and just real understanding and sadness out of that film from the scene in the radio store, the sound store, just to him sitting in that get up at the party, the cowboy get up, just looking very sad and solemn, just like one of the funniest shots in any Paul Thomas Anderson movie. And then at the end of the film, really, he's the realization of what all of these characters have been striving for. To me, he's really the heart of Boogie Nights, and I want to give him some credit, and I want him to do another movie with PTA because he's great, and he really has been underserved in recent years. He's the man.
It's a great shout. Buck Swope. We love Buck Swope.
We love Buck.
We love Buck Swope. I love that pick. I kind of figured that you were going to go there, Jay.
Did you really?
Yeah, like he was one of the three performances that I thought of for myself. I just think of him in that bank scene and just wanting to have a new life, even though society is not going to give it to him at that moment. And then I think of obviously the gun going off, and then in that all white suit and that blood just all over him. Another just iconically hilarious, funny shot, and just this physical comedy that Cheadle has to do in here. And it's such a sad character too, but there's just something you just love about Buck.
At the end, he gets a little baby, and that maybe it's the classic dad bump in a movie where I'm a dad now, and now any dad scene is like 75% more potent than it used to be.
Yeah. I mean, I thought about obviously Joaquin Phoenix in The Master. That's another Titanic performance that is the best of his career, in my opinion. But yeah, I agree with Sean. I know it's boring, but sometimes the boring pick's the right pick in Daniel Day-Lewis and There Will Be Blood. And I just think of all the characters that sort of he's ever played and encompassed, and it's the one that we'll remember him the most. It's this collision of the greatest actor on the planet with our favorite director coming together. You know, there's the rival movie being made on the other side, but they're blowing up, you know, got the smoke and everything. But I think of also the quiet scenes. I think the opening of that film of just him out, that shot of just him out in the cold inside the desert and just kind of, you know, bundling up, smoking and just trying, you know, I think of those little moments. I think of on the train with HW realizing that he's going to have to take care of this ward. I mean, him as they're bringing in and him, they're having to blow up the first oil derrick and him just exhausted emotionally, mentally at that point. There's just so many little quiet moments that Daniel Day-Lewis is able to bring, and they feel like such important details that then open up to the big, obviously bombastic monologues and all the hitting and the slapping and the violence and the, you know, and the killing of Paul Dano and all these different things. But it's also still, like I told you on that episode, Jay, there's moments of real humor that I find a lot in Daniel Day-Lewis's performance, just different mannerisms or different facial expressions. I forgot to even mention about like the napkin over his face when HW and him are at like the steakhouse and he's screaming about the deal that they made for the pipeline, and just an out of control yet in control scene from Daniel Day-Lewis there. And then, yeah, it's that's why it's the best. It rules.
I think it's a good performance. Yeah, one of my great college party tricks was verbatim spouting off the "I drink your milkshake" monologue, which it's crazy to think about. That was a thing you could pull out at a fraternity party in the early 2010s, but movies used to be different. I miss those days. Those were the good old days.
I know. I was going to ask if you learned, freshened up on it to do it and for Sean, but I guess you didn't.
Well, we lost so much time. We had to start later because Sean had to get in his Snow White getup. So
yeah, that's true.
I don't want to keep him any longer than we have.
Still in the Snow White.
Really uncomfortable in this girdle right now.
Let's do best female performance. Jay, you want to kick it off?
Yeah. So female performance, I'm going a little more basic with this one, although it is another Boogie Nights performance. I'm going Julianne Moore in Boogie Nights, who really does establish the sense of longing that is really the through line for the entire movie. She is so caring towards everyone in the film while also having these inherent vices that are dragging her down. She has this found family because she has kind of destroyed her relationship with her real family. And that dichotomy is one of the driving forces of the movie. She's unbelievably, again, just really caring, but also still kind of sexy. And her mixed motivations at every turn is some of the best stuff in the movie. And she's my pick. She's good, in my opinion.
Okay, you got my pick too. That was where I went with it.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there are a few Paul Thomas Anderson movies that don't feature very many female characters. So this is, you know, kind of but there are occasionally incredible performances from female characters. Vicky Krieps in Phantom Thread came to mind. We just saw Lana Heim in Licorice Pizza, who I thought was exceptional. But I think Julianne Moore is that is the significant actress performance in one of his films, in my opinion.
Gotcha. I just think of that scene with her and Heather Graham and her asking her to be her mom, but then, you know, you flash then to the courtroom, you know, the deposition scene and just how completely alone and vulnerable and isolated she is throughout that entire film. Yeah. More.
Then he goes to Burt Reynolds and says, "Don't call me lady."
Yeah.
Love that part.
Honestly, it's still one of the best monologues ever. That monologue role.
One of the best monologues ever.
Say it all the time. Yeah. It's great.
All right.
You wouldn't understand, Jay. You just wouldn't understand.
I haven't done enough Xanax.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of pills. But I went with a more recent pick. I went with Vicky Krieps for Phantom Thread. I think that she was such a revelation and discovery. That's the other great thing about Paul Thomas Anderson movies that we don't talk about enough is the discovery of new people. And you know, I thought about Alana Haim as well, like you mentioned, Sean, but Vicky Krieps for me, from the moment she walks in, she is unsettling the greatest actor of our time and outacting him in every move. And that movie is completely built upon the fact that Alma has to navigate through waters that have been charted many, many times before. We see that right at the beginning of that film with the Joanna character of she's trying to do exactly what Alma has done, trying to find her way through. She can't do it. And through this, she's able to turn Reynolds' world upside down. The thing that I'm always so kind of wowed about with Alma is being able to get Searle on her side by the end of that film too, and realizing that that's actually the way you stay there. That's actually the way you form an ally with the man that you love, is with the people that also love him as well, and understand that, you know, maybe a mushroom omelet's not the worst thing for all of us in the world, and that it's done with such care and precision. It's such an interesting, like, if you've been married, all of us are married. We're all in creative forms whatsoever. We can all relate to probably our wives wanting to kill us at a certain point, right? And I don't know, every time I watch that performance, I actually start seeing it through the eyes of my wife, sort of the way in which you're tired, the different ways in which she takes a lot of the emotional jabs that he throws at, and the way that Crepes ultimately by the end, when she's got that fake smile when she's turning the butter and putting the mushrooms in, it's like, oh, she is fully in control of everything in here, dude. You can draw your little dresses and make them all you want, but you're so totally fucked. And that's what I love about that performance so much. She's incredible, and she should have been nominated for an Oscar. That was insane that both Manville and Daniel Day-Lewis got in, and
yeah,
got in.
I'm glad you mentioned Manville, but the one thing about that movie, I will say, it gave my wife some very bad ideas that have cost me a lot of PTO days over the last few years. But nevertheless, amazing performance. And shout out Manville, who is probably my number 2.
Yeah, I mean, Manville's just insane in that film as well too.
She's hilarious.
Yeah,
her timing is unbelievable. She was born to deliver PTA dialogue.
I could honestly have her in every PTA movie going forward. I love Cyril so much. Best direction.
Is this the same as best movie? I mean, isn't that kind of
maybe? Not for me at least.
Interesting.
I think its best direction, surprisingly enough, is in Boogie Nights. I think that
early.
No, I mean, like, if you go from Hard 8 to Boogie Nights, it's such a swing. I think that it's not that I'm taking his direction for granted in other films, and definitely he's had such directorial achievements later on in his career. But the idea of, like, what Sean was saying earlier about this young guy who's still, that's still very green and just hasn't made a lot of movies up until this point, and he's coming out with this fucking crane shot in the first 5 minutes of this movie, and he's going all over this club, and he's tackling all these storylines, and he's making all of it work together, and he's ripping off all the greats, but he's also elevating him to make his own statement. And I'm still kind of floored by him being able to get away with it and doing it at such an entertaining, consistently compelling angle. And that movie's over 20 years old, and it's still impeccably shot and impeccably put together. And then, I mean, just all the different kind of uses of that tracking shot. I think we talked about it, Jay, the tracking shot of Jack inside the Pornhub conglomerate and how sad it is. And then the how...
Yeah, pick a tracking shot.
Yeah, the tracking shot at the beginning.
700 in that movie.
The tracking shot at the end of the film, and how it's very different from how this family was found to how this family is by the end. And so... yeah, I went with Boogie Nights on this one.
This award is for most directing or best directing?
It's the
all
most.
All right. Yeah, I see. Sometimes
he directs that movie a lot.
He does, but also
he directs that movie very hard.
Name another director. Not many directors of that age can make a movie that's, yes, while it's over stylized and kind of purposefully done, is able to stick a landing and it work, and then we're all going back to it over and over again and be like, damn.
So you just really admire the vitality of it, the movement, the kind of sense of freedom that movie has, which I totally get.
Yeah, I mean, it's of that also still establishing himself too as who is he as a director, and I kind of like that rawness. I wish he would go back to it a little bit, that he has, I think, in those first couple of features.
A movie fully made by someone who doesn't know what he's not supposed to do yet, which I admire. Works. I like that about it.
But Exactly. It's also been empowered with a bunch of toys that he's always wanted to have.
Yes.
And finally gets to have. Obviously Hard 8 is made very cheaply, and that movie wasn't just, I don't know what the budget was, 15 million maybe on Boogie Nights, something like that. So he's got all this period costuming. He's got that crane that you talked about. He's got, a DP and a production designer and costumes, and, he's using all of the tools that he's been dreaming about for the last 15 years. So I certainly don't begrudge him that. Wouldn't be my pick.
Yeah.
Well, what is your pick?
My pick is The Master.
We are aligned again.
Because The Master is not conventionally satisfying entertainment. It is more abstract, obtuse at times, more sprawling, more theoretical, and it's one of the first times, maybe the first time in his career, where he's completely unafraid to leave something unexplained. And I think that requires a kind of confidence as a filmmaker. Even in There Will Be Blood, which is this like deeply metaphorical movie, right, about God and commerce and America, he's kind of like putting his thumb right on it the whole time. In The Master, you kind of walk out of The Master knowing that you've been swept away, but not really knowing where you've been swept away to. And you can draw your own conclusions, and there are a lot of things that are obviously interesting to him. And I think the movie is like a series of red herrings about structures and faith and power and all these things. But he's willing to just like let the freak flag fly a little bit. He's willing to let the camera linger on images or on Joaquin Phoenix doing odd and discomforting things in a way that, you know, you don't get the impression that if he was going to do something like that 10 or 15 years ago, it would have been played for laughs with John C. Reilly. And instead it's played for this kind of human drama in The Master in a way that I find kind of amazing. It's not, you know, it's technically proficient and beautiful like all of his films are, and there are cool camera moves. And, you know, I think of like Philip Seymour Hoffman coming down the aisle on the day of his daughter's wedding, you know, and kind of like greeting everyone. And or like when he gives the speech in the ballroom and the camera's kind of moving around and tracking him through the room. So there are moments like that, but it's a movie that is less worried about the grandeur of its production and more worried about the grandeur of the staging and the idea. So that was my pick.
Oh, it was it was actually my number 2, to be fair, guys.
Right, it's a good movie. It is my winner, and you know, I'll echo plenty of what Sean just said, but for me, The Master is really the movie where Paul Thomas Anderson becomes fully Paul Thomas Anderson. I think pastiche is too strong a word for the stuff that came before, and There Will Be Blood, I think, is a significant turning point as far as him kind of becoming his own filmmaker. But to Sean's point, I think that movie is simpler than The Master. And while There Will Be Blood was kind of him adopting some Kubrickian tonal and aesthetic tendencies, really The Master is where he does that kind of thematically and says, this movie is going to be very complex. I'm not really going to really hand it to you on a silver platter to admire and talk about how smart I am. Some people are going to say this movie is nonsense that I don't really want to think about. And I think there's a power in that by itself, and the ability to give yourself over to that idea and say, you might not understand this, you might not appreciate this, but this means a whole lot to me. And just that combination of the skill and the control and the restraint really comes to the fore in The Master. So that's my pick.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I like that movie a lot. I think we all do. Screenplay. It's back over to Sean. Sean, kick us off.
I went with Phantom Thread.
Yeah.
I think
clever little flick.
I think it's a film of restraint for him, and also has maybe like his sharpest daggers. Like, you know, we were just talking about Manville and Crepes and Daniel Day-Lewis across the table at breakfast, you know, and there are moments, and some of that is in the way that the sound design works, where every teacup that is set down on a plate, it just kind of rattles your bones.
ASMR movie.
Yeah, exactly. But that, you know, a lot of that is in the writing. A lot of that is in the conception of the characters and the setting. And so, you know, I think it's a beautifully detailed movie. Like the ordering of the breakfast the first time that he encounters Alma is one of those things where you can kind of like recite the list of things that he orders from that breakfast menu, and the attention that is paid to those kinds of details, I think, deepens your appreciation for it. You know, I think he's had kind of more virtuosic scripts. Magnolia is this like extraordinary, like blah, like get it all out, like 300-page exegesis on the universe that is kind of astounding when you think about it, but it has no restraint. It's the opposite of that. So I admire the restraint in Phantom Thread. And, you know, it feels like something made by a guy in his 40s. You know, it's like, okay, slow down. What's really good? Like, what don't we need? How do we cut out the fat?
Exactly.
And how do we make this sharp and tight? And I like that he did that for a change, because it's not usually, even in Punch Drunk Love, which is a kind of spare script as well, there's so many flourishes, kind of cinematic flourishes, where he feels like he's like, God, I hope people, recognize that I still have the juice, but I'm going to do it with a different Jacques Demy color palette or whatever. Phantom Thread is like very tight and restrained in a way that I really respect and think is very powerful, while also still being entertaining and amusing.
Yep. I'll still never understand how that screenplay wasn't nominated either. That's just like one of those screenplays from that year. That's it. Yeah, it's a perfect screenplay.
That is crazy. I didn't know that wasn't nominated.
No,
that's insane.
Yeah, it's one of the. Well, it's
normally where they let the freak flags fly. Screenplay.
Well, that's the thing is in I've noticed this over the years, is that people respect Paul Thomas Anderson so much as a director that I think people forget what an amazing writer he is as well. It was sort of like a lot of that happened during the Licorice Pizza year a couple of years ago, where it was like, we're going to give it to the guy that, made a movie about his home in Ireland, and rather than one of our great writers of our time, like, okay, sure, Belfast is what we're doing this year. All right, guys.
That was a game changing screenplay.
I mean, Sean's quoting it every day, but it's I think that's the thing is, it's like some people have in their mind, one day we'll get him a director win, or one day, he's such he's an auteur, he's a director, he's a director, and people again just forget that he's writing these incredibly detailed and sharp characters, like you're mentioning, Sean, in a movie like that. And yeah, a movie like The Big Sick gets in over.
Not winning an Oscar is a badge of honor. I maintain this.
I mean, I agree with it too, but then you're like,
never win one.
It doesn't make any sense though. It's just like the adulation for that movie is how it overperforms and stuff like that, and how that screenplay has been in, as like you're talking about it, like Cyril's scenes at the breakfast where she, punches Reynolds down, or anything that Daniel Day-Lewis really says, like,
it's too good for the Oscars.
I can start my morning with a confrontation. Like, how many times have we seen this memeified to the point where, and then it all starts from that wonderful screenplay. And yes, the butter on the toast is the one that always gets me every time, because
it's very loud.
Yeah, it's very loud. Jay, your screenplay winner?
Not to give away my favorite PTA movie with the director and screenplay wins back to back, but I went with The Master, which to me is such a literary film. It's so character driven, and the dialogue is, it kind of oscillates between this very terse, simplistic dialogue and then this very grandiose dialogue. And it has these characters that are so well defined, and these themes that are, in my opinion, so well defined, but also so, hard to decipher. And I just love kind of the bookending of the giant sand woman. I think is a very kind of literary piece of symbolism that really encapsulates so much of what that movie is about. And even in just kind of the writings of the settings and everything along those lines, I just think it's a really powerful piece of writing that is even plussed up by his direction and the performances and everything else. I think it's a pretty immaculate piece of work.
Yeah, it's pretty great. My screenplay winner is, I didn't think I would actually pick this one, probably start of the series, but upon the rewatches, I'm going to go with Inherent Vice.
A bananas pick. I love it.
I mean, I'm going out there. I mean, listen, he wrote that screenplay, adapting that from that novel. He wrote it word for word, just obsessive. Like Sean, you talking about like the Magnolia screenplay, these 300-page screenplay. The reading about the process of how he adapted Inherent Vice is an insane process. But I mean, we talk about The Master and how many ideas and themes that are going on in that film. And then you look at something like Inherent Vice, this movie that is this, on the surface, this stoner comedy, but it's definitely about paranoia and Manson in the 70s and Nixon and all these things that are going on. And it's so deeply layered. And I think, again, like The Master movie, I go back to, and I'm trying to figure out different things. And you have the police system, and you have the FBI, and you have the district attorney, and how Doc has also got this former love, and how everything is sort of woven and connected. And over time, I've seen that movie like 4 or 5 times, and each time it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer. And the fact that he was able to pull this off is a real feat to him as a writer, because Pynchon writes novels that are like unadaptable pieces of work, and just you never thought you'd get a decent film, let alone a movie that I think is pretty damn great out of it. And yeah, it's then elevated by these performances. But for me, I think that this is such a challenge for him as a director and as a writer later in his life. Like, he wrote Punch Drunk Love as a challenge to himself, and made Punch Drunk Love as a challenge to himself. Like, okay, I want to do a 90-minute comedy after doing these 3-hour epics for the last 2 films. This feels like after The Master, making something so philosophical, I'm going to take this unadaptable novel and I'm going to do something that no one's been able to do. And I always admire writers that are taking those source materials and really being able to make them their own as well too. So yeah, I have to go with that screenplay. It's kind of crazy that it works.
This is the one that I still haven't cracked yet.
No,
advice. Yeah,
I think I cracked it. I think I finally did it.
Okay,
good job, Jay.
Congrats.
Thank you.
I know why he likes it. I know why he was drawn to the source material. I think the performances are very entertaining. I think it's really funny at times. I think there's a kind of a mystery in the romance, and sort of like the one who got away is a fascinating theme in the story, and it's hard not to project certain things about his life onto the interest there. But it's kind of a platter movie. It's like a lot of ideas that I don't know that they ever really fully sink for me, but it's got great moments, and maybe as I get older, I'll start to understand it more.
That's totally fair. I think, like, for the longest time, that was how I was with it as well too.
I actively disliked that movie the first time I saw it.
Did you really?
Yeah. I don't like the book either.
That. Oh, you don't like the book? Oh, okay.
Not particularly. Who
Sean,
should direct Gravity's Rainbow?
Sean, have you read the book?
I have read the book. I have not read Gravity's Rainbow. I tried. And I think David Robert Mitchell should make that movie.
I think it's asking for a Russo brothers treatment.
It sounds terrible. But
From those greatest auteurs.
There's been a rumor that Vineland was going to be the next thing that he does, but it sounds like that's not actually the case. That he's not actually adapting it. But he's only adapted 2 things, and really only one thing. Like, this is really his only adaptation.
Yeah.
I guess technically Oil is considered an adaptation, but it's not.
Yeah, but that's just like
as loose as it gets.
Yeah, I got a book, but I'm really not. Yeah. I'm just taking ideas out of here. I'm not taking character or plot or story.
It's a bold pick, Ryan. I applaud you.
Well, I try to spice things up around here. I can't just be putting out Daniel Day-Lewis's with every pick. You know what I mean? All right, best needle drop. This is a hard one because he's got like dozens and dozens of needle drops. I mean, Sean, you've interviewed. By the way, Sean's interviewed Paul Thomas Anderson before, and you've talked about needle drops specifically with him in the past. So, I don't remember that conversation at all. Honestly, it's all blur. I listen to it every day, but as I'm waking up, it's wonderful. Thank you. We gotta get to the clips. I talked to him twice with Bill Simmons, which was a lot of fun. I mean, those are great conversations. Thank you. It's made me feel a lot better about liking him as much as I do, because he's just a very cool, normal guy.
Yeah,
not weird, not an asshole.
Seems very laid back, like you're just on a Zoom, like you are with us, just like kind of just hanging out and talking about movies.
Yeah. Yeah, you know what I mean? And that's what he wants to do, is he just wants to talk about like what he saw that he thought was cool, and just very easygoing. Yeah, because I've seen interviews where they're like, everyone's like, "Let's get deep," and he's just like, "No, I don't really." He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to do the like. He actually, I think, actively would be annoyed if I was like, "Here's what I think There Will Be Blood is about." He's just like, "Did you think that was cool, man? Awesome, thank you." Like, very California. So
it's the great dichotomy, Sean, between the Michael Mann conversations and the Paul Thomas Anderson conversations. It's 2 ends of the spectrum on that one.
Yes, the kind of monastic philosophical approach to the artwork of heist movies versus the guy who's trying to write about America and is like, I thought that girl was cute, like there's just something very
Happy Gilmore's sick, dude.
Yeah, exactly.
T2, best movie ever. You know what I mean? So. Which
I think a lot of his fans identify in him too, that there's not this kind of pomposity about him. There's not a pretension about him. My best needle drop is Do Your Thing by Charles Wright in Boogie Nights, which comes at this like critical kind of middle section of the film that when we're transitioning from 1979 to 1980 before Little Bill commits suicide, and like uses this incredible R&B song, this kind of improvised R&B song, to like ratchet tension up and up and up and up until it culminates in the changing of the decade and like basically the crisis point arriving for this clan of adult film creators. And that song is just one of those songs that I'd never heard it until I saw the movie, and now I feel like I play it like every other day, and it's just like stitched into the fabric of my life. And not because I want to be reminded of that very traumatic scene, but because it's just like, it's a great tune. And he is like a lot of his cohort generationally. You know, Tarantino is kind of widely acclaimed most for this, but just like having this sixth sense for what is going to be the right song for a moment. And you can almost picture him picturing the scene in his head as he, you know, goes through the record store. So that's my favorite. I mean, there are probably a dozen other examples that I would cite, but that's the one that I like.
Jay?
As for mine, since I have cracked the movie, and immediately after saying I cracked Inherent Vice, I felt like such an asshole. But I am going to bring up Inherent Vice again and say that my favorite needle drop is actually Vitamin C, the song that plays over the credits in Inherent Vice, which to me is such a tone setter, also just a banger in general. Just really ups the energy of that after kind of this somber rejoining of these former lovers, and then you have this great oneer that's going on in front of this Vitamin C song that is just so peppy and also has this mystery to it that really kind of brings out this disorientation that is to come in the film. And again, just a great song. So I think that moment is fantastic.
Love that pick.
Yeah. I went with a more recent one from Licorice Pizza, and I went with Let Me Roll It, Paul McCartney and Wings.
These would be my number 2 and 3 picks, guys. I love it.
Oh, nice.
Excellent.
I think the reason why
the podium.
I think the reason why I love it, and I mean that movie, it's so interesting when that song plays in the moment in the film. It's like right after, essentially, like Gary saves her from Sean Penn and the motorcycle stuff, and she's exhausted, and the whole movie, Alana is being mistreated or looked upon by every man, older or younger than her, as a sort of property or thing that they can all go and get. And her hope is that Gary will never be those people. There's the optimism left that Gary can change and not be like every guy that we've seen encountered in this movie. And that scene at the mattress store is kind of the perfect encapsulation of that entire movie and in the thesis of Alana for Gary, in that here she is laying on this bed, the song's playing, it's all about, wanting to be with a girl, and, you giving me something, I understand, palm of your hand. It's like, it's all right there. It's very close. And Gary could be he could be inappropriate. He could do something, but he doesn't. And it's just really the only thing that he does is he just wants to hold her hand, or rather yet have their pinkies touch. And it leads them to the next morning when they're reading the paper at the diner. And it's really just, again, just such a perfect placement of that wonderful song in the middle of that movie. But it has a lot of real meaning behind it, which I think more than like Tarantino, like I think does it with like the vibes of a lot of his films, and like those needle drops they are put in there, and for me, it's all, he's writing the movie out, and he's got the vinyls playing, and it's a soundtrack to the movie. I think with PTA, his needle drops are much more purposeful at times, and have a lot to do within the story and for those characters and what it means for them in those moments. A little bit more purposeful for me, and definitely is the case in that film. And it was the moment in Licorice Pizza where it all then really clicked for me the first time I watched it. And every time I watch it, I still think that like that is one of the best scenes in that movie. And it's in his like most recent one. So it's just like, yes, he still got it. Like, like you don't ever doubt, people like, you don't doubt your heroes. You don't doubt, like athletes, right? You don't doubt LeBron that he can go and have a great game and, or whatnot, or you don't doubt Tom Brady or whatever. But when you have that moment of that, and then you see them, they're like, oh, yeah, this is why they're the best. This is why they're the GOAT. I understand it completely, 110%. And it's a needle drop like that. So yeah, it's my favorite. Okay. Jay.
The hardest one.
The Muse. Who's his muse? PTA's Acting.
Oh, we're doing Muse. Oh, I thought Scene was next.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. Scene. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I jumped the gun there. That was my fault. Yep. Best scene.
Best scene. Okay. So this is so hard. I mean, there's so many that you could pick from every movie. So I did end up going a little sentimental on this one. As I've mentioned before, the first ever writing I did on film was at a website called rainingfrogsreviews.com, because another game changer for me was Magnolia. And then I took a film class at the prestigious Auburn University Film School. Of course, Octavia Spencer went there. So, okay, stop hating. But the frog scene from Magnolia is, for me, kind of a game changer, just from the perspective of, I didn't know you were allowed to really do that. It is such an abstract sequence. You can project so many different meanings on that sequence. And just from an image making standpoint, it's like nothing you've ever seen in a movie before. And it means so many different things to different people. And just because of that, I feel like it was such an important step for Paul Thomas Anderson. Again, that is a movie where he is throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And honestly, almost all of it sticks. And that moment, the most bold, ambitious moment of the entire movie, fully sticks for me. And it's my favorite PTA scene.
I love it. Sean, what do you think of that scene?
I also chose a scene from Magnolia, but not one with quite so much magic. I think the sequence where Frank T.J. Mackey confronts his dying father, is kind of that's the best acting Tom Cruise has ever done. That's the most kind of out of control I've felt watching a movie, where I vanished inside the movie and I was just dying for this very confusing, difficult character who were made essentially to despise and distrust while also laugh at for about an hour and a half until the sequence comes along. And it's obviously incredibly personal for PTA, that sequence, and very much informed by the experiences that he had. But it also is just so larded with everything we know about Tom Cruise and his complicated relationship with his family and a complicated relationship with his father. But even setting all that stuff aside that we know kind of ex post facto, just watching it, I felt like I was going to explode when I first saw that scene. So there are other sequences that I love. There's like Back Beyond in The Master, and there's the oil derrick catching fire, and There Will Be Blood. And, there are like extravagant, beautiful moments of image making that I think really only he can pull off. But the most I've felt is that scene with Frank and Jason Robards' character.
Yeah, it's not the first thing I think of when I think about that scene, but Philip Seymour Hoffman in the background, out of focus in that scene, adds so much to those moments. He's really underrated in that movie. But that scene in particular, he's huge.
Just the living embodiment of empathy in that movie. Phil Parma. Yeah,
absolutely. And then just, I mean, you mentioned all the layers that you add with Cruise as a movie star forward and going forward and being in the past, it's all there. But then, I mean, there's a build up to this throughout the entire movie, just from Hoffman's perspective. There's the build up, even when he takes that small breath before he walks in there, and he's angry and he's still confident. He's still frank when he walks in there. And then when he sees his father, he's done. It's over. All that hate is gone. And he's kind of a kid again. And it's brilliant. It's brilliant work by Cruise. I went with a more conventional pick, but I think that you can't go wrong with picking the processing scene in The Master. And I just love the way he blocks it. I love that you never see Lancaster Dodd in this scene for the most part, unless it's when it's over. you always see Hoffman's off camera and it's completely focused on Joaquin Phoenix. The slapping, all of it. Yes, the physical stuff is there, but it's really about getting to the core of who Freddy is. And it starts off as just these drinking buddies, and it's no different than like you trying to get with your drinking buddy and examine, maybe you take it to a next step in your friendship of trying to really learn about them and their life and everything. And it's just taken to the ultimate extreme. But then there's that moment when he closes his eyes and he goes back to Doris, and all of that stuff is brought then back in, and we slowly see how Phoenix is emotionally at that moment, and how vulnerable he is, and how there's that moment when Dodd tells him, like, you thought we were fools, and he's like, but do you think we're fools now? No, sir. Like, this is real. Freddy does understand that, like, there's something to this, even though throughout the rest of the film he's fighting against it and resisting it back and forth, but there is something real within that moment. And that's what's really interesting about then the rest of the film and his actions is about these. I talked about it as like I put it up on a Letterboxd review. Just like, this movie is the ultimate embodiment of the worst friendship that probably anybody has ever experienced. And then they're connected in so many different ways. And it'll go back to the later in the film where he finds Freddy at the movie theaters on the phone. And he's like, we're connected. And this is the endpoint of that connection. But it's also, I don't know, there's just something. I never thought Joaquin Phoenix could probably do that as an actor. And just, when the first time I saw it in 35 or 70 millimeter, I couldn't breathe. I was just like him. I was holding my breath the entire time. There's something breathtaking about that. And then it just breaks, and then they drink the hooch and smoke the cigarettes, and then they're done. And they're back to their debauchery, which is really, really funny about it too. And that movie is extremely funny, but that is the one,
Yes.
one of the moments of pure, just like, holy shit. You're really taking in a lot here in that moment. But yeah, that's my pick. And
Who is the Dodd and who is the Quill of our podcast, Ryan?
oh, you're definitely the Quill. I mean, you're just chaos in a bottle, and
Agent of Chaos.
Exactly. But and yeah, and I'm writing the second book right now. It's not as good as the first, but we'll see.
That's why I sit so weird when we do our podcast.
It's very, yes,
I'm all hunched over.
Exactly. You've been touching the wall a lot today.
Looking like that lady who has a calcium deficiency and old. Remember that?
Yes, very much. The Muse Award. Now we could do the Muse Award.
Yes. Should we all just say it at once?
Yeah, I feel like.
I mean, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
It's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Let's be honest.
It's Philip Seymour Hoffman. Yeah.
I think John C. Reilly is a nice second place.
Yeah.
Frankenstein himself.
Yeah. I love that
Licorice
cameo
Pizza.
so much.
I love it too.
Yeah, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
And always interesting how he's never really the star.
No. Well,
I guess he is the titular master, but
yeah.
even then, that's Freddy's movie. And
it's his. I think it's his too, Sean. I think it's both of theirs. But maybe that's just my attachment to Hoffman and missing.
It's through
him,
the lens of Freddy, though.
Yeah,
it's Freddy's POV.
It's his POV. Yeah, for sure.
So I just think he's obviously one of the most remarkable actors in movie history, and their bond is deep. And I think PTA understood what was so funny about Philip Seymour Hoffman. And I think obviously because he's passed, we speak of him in these reverential tones, and we kind of maybe underestimate just as the shit eating craps player in Hard Eight, or as the mattress man in Punch Drunk Love. I mean, these are hilarious movie performances, in addition to like the angst and anxiety of Scotty J, the incredible power of Lancaster Dodd, that empathy of Phil Parma. Like, he brings something different to every part too. So it's just very sad that they're not making more movies together. Very sad.
Just a necessity and a necessary cog in the machine. And it was always just anytime, whether, like you're saying, Sean, he was big or small, he just made an impact that you couldn't forget. and they grew up together essentially in this business. Like, he becomes the premier character actor of his time because he's working with somebody like Paul Thomas Anderson. He becomes the director that he becomes, and then they come back together really at the height of their powers for the master. And it's this collaboration together that, like, every time I mean, there's even like the volatileness of like line delivery that's also, again, hilarious. Like, when he screams at the contrarian at the big fuck, kind of moment as well. It's like, it's all, or when he yells at Laura Dern, it's the way he's able to use that bottled up anger to make moments of hilarity, but then awkwardness as well, but then uncomfortability. Like, they just work the best together. And I think it's just a real fucking shame that we're never going to see another collaboration. I mean, and I think that was so great about seeing Cooper in Licorice Pizza, was just that, and it works so well, was just that is the carrying of the torch, and hopefully maybe more collaborations there down the road, because they really did, once again, work really great together there too.
Yeah, I mean, it is, they're kind of inseparable in my mind forever. The sad fact is, when Paul Thomas Anderson makes one more movie, Philip Seymour Hoffman will only have been in half of his movies, which stinks. So they had many more collaborations ahead of him. Very unfortunate that he passed. What do you think is the number one movie on the by popularity on Philip Seymour Hoffman's Letterboxd page?
Ooh, Along Came Polly.
Is it the Hunger Games film?
Maybe
Hunger Games,
Games?
Catching Fire.
Catching Fire. He's actually pretty good in that.
Philip Seymour Hoffman is never bad.
Yeah, he's like another actor in Catching Fire. He's like Jeffrey Wright. They're always good in every movie.
He's an escalator. Every movie he's in, we go up.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. 100%.
Sure.
And he never, no matter what garbage he was in, whether he took the job for a paycheck or not, he was giving it his all.
Yep.
The MVC Award, Most Valuable Collaborator.
I feel like this is a little redundant, actually, after I proposed it. But
well, I chose to do a below the line person. Yeah. And I picked up Robert Elswit, which is not to say that since they stopped working together on the last couple of films that his films have looked bad or anything like that. And he's obviously taken over a lot of the responsibilities as the cinematographer on the last couple of films. But I think the first 7 were shot by Elswit.
Yeah.
And they are among the most beautifully photographed movies of the 90s and the 2000s. So it just seemed they just had something very special. And it's interesting to like look at Elswit's career since then, because since they stopped working together, I would not say it's the most hallowed material, but he does still make even mediocre material look incredible. You know, like I like King Richard. I think it's like a kind of a B+ of a movie, but it's hugely elevated by
that's
camera.
True.
So and I think it's fun to think about what PTA kind of learned from Elswit, you know, who can be like kind of cantankerous and is an outspoken guy, and but is just such an incredible director of photography. So that was my pick.
I think in the minds of many, the reputation of PTA is like, oh, well, he's always kind of been his own cinematographer, which is not true, because they worked together 7 times.
Yeah.
So that's a really good pick. If I had to go, you know, I kind of disqualified PSH for this one, and I went Johnny Greenwood. I mean, who has kind of become his right hand man as far as the music is concerned. When he's not doing a needle drop, it's Johnny Greenwood's incredible score. And you look at something like Punch Drunk Love, and even then, or even a little bit in Boogie Nights, he had this kind of weird discordant string music that would play occasionally.
Yeah.
And you saw that seed that would start to grow, and then Greenwood just like takes it and completely runs with it and makes these scores that nobody else really makes these days. And I feel like has really inspired kind of a new movement in film scoring, really.
Completely agree with that. Yeah. Michael Penn and John Bryan in the beginning almost seemed too sweet for the tone that he was after in retrospect. As much as I love the scores in Boogie Nights and Punch Drunk Love and Magnolia, he seems to have found a match, a kind of experimental match in Greenwood.
Yeah.
I picked Greenwood as well. I think that we talk about the swing of into the new era of PTA. The first thing you see, or the first thing you of either see or hear in both There Will Be Blood and The Master, is his scores, just blaring in both different ways. The bum 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 in The Master, and the in There Will Be Blood, and just in setting the tone. That's, I think, what's so great about Greenwood's scores is they have replaced a lot of other elements of other collaborations, and they are the tone setter. And I mean, I think of even Phantom Thread, of this the eeriness, or the almost like gothic horror vibe that he was trying to go to, the gothic romance that he was trying to get at, of like Rebecca as being a big film that was inspired by that. So that score having a lot of that, but even like in Licorice Pizza, there's a couple, like when Alana is trying to find Gary at the end, it's not a needle drop or anything that he really uses. He's using almost like a throwback of that simplistic kind of sweet score. And then Greenwood's branched off and done other things, but their collaborations are really a big necessity to the latter part of those films being so successful. And I would never want them to not work together again, kind of, in a lot of ways. So, and speaking of working together, we talk about actors all the time that we'd love, and that have worked with Paul Thomas Anderson. He's worked with a ton, but last one here is the actor you'd like to see most work in a PTA movie who hasn't been in a PTA movie. Yeah, that was the big thing, is that you can't like say, oh, I'd like to see Daniel Day-Lewis come out of retirement. Though we'd all would love to see that, obviously. But Sean, did you have an answer, or do you maybe have a couple answers for this?
Yeah, I got this question in a mailbag on the pod a while back, and I think when I was asked the question, I said Regina Hall, and I think Regina Hall is in the new movie. I'm not sure if that's been confirmed.
That whole new movie is like, is that the movie he's making, or is that happening, or like,
I'm not sure. I mean, my understanding was that he and Leonardo DiCaprio had finally agreed that they were going to do something together. They've been talking about it for 25 years.
Yeah,
they're doing it. Regina Hall's in it, but it's honestly clouded in some mystery right now for obvious reasons. So if not Regina Hall, because she's about to be in one, my current acting obsession is John Magaro, and nobody writes dumb white guys like Paul Thomas Anderson, and nobody plays dumb white guys like John Magaro. So I feel like there's some, slightly taciturn, slightly skeptical, but maybe not the brightest guy in the room. That's a mode for PTA and a mode for Magaro. So I would be curious to see those two collaborate on something.
I love that.
Magaro has a speed similar to kind of what PSH could bring to the table. So
I like that a little bit too, like leads there's something similar, that kind of a little rumpled, a little skeptical, that I feel like he would fit well with him.
Yeah, totally. And Magaro, I guess, has kind of got a little more of that Joaquin, like, you make me a little uneasy. There's something about you.
Yes, exactly.
My pick, we recently did our Atlanta Film Critics voting for our annual awards, and on my ballot, I had Jamie Foxx in The Burial, because I think he is electric in that movie.
He is.
And I have a list here of like 25 people I'd want PTA to work with, but Jamie Foxx was the one I settled on. He has an energy and a knack for both humor and drama, and also he still has the ability to play a character of any age. Basically, he looks amazing. I think he would fit like a glove. I could see him doing something like the Bradley Cooper role, for example, or even something more along the lines of what I talked about with Cheadle, where he could be this very empathetic, almost sad sack character. And I would love to see Jamie Foxx work with PTA.
That would be really good. That would be, yeah. I don't know what that film would be.
It would probably be good, because it would be a PTA movie.
It's true. I know that he's been also talking about wanting to work with Denzel Washington as well too.
There's been whispers of that
rumored project as well too for that. Obviously there's like a lot of like, I think a lot of obvious options, like Leo and that's, kind of seem like it might happen pretty sooner rather than later. I thought about somebody that I would just absolutely love to see him work with, because I think she's a chameleon and she can work in pretty much any genre, and she's really funny and kooky in her own right. And I think she's one of the best actresses that works today. I said Olivia Colman. I think Olivia Colman she'd fit a 70s vibe that he really calling card and goes back to. But then also I think that she has a presence about her that's very funny. And I mean, she's in Jay's favorite movie of the year, Wonka. And you gotta
loves
love
that
Wonka.
chocolate.
You gotta love the chocolate and the Wonka. I know, Sean, it's not good. But
I was not a fan.
No. You weren't singing and dancing?
No, I'm mystified by the critical reaction to that movie. Mystified. I have no idea what people are talking
about. But no, I just think that she would work really well with him. And another person I also thought about too was Jeffrey Wright. He loves working with character actors. He loves working with the supporting actors, right? Being able to kind of show his chops in something like American Fiction, but then, a comedic side, but then also working with Wes Anderson. But we clearly know how great of a dramatic actor he is as well. That's somebody that I think those two would be the ones that I think that would, like, maybe it's a Jeffrey Wright, Olivia Colman PTA movie. Like, maybe that's not going to get Warner Brothers or somebody to give him $50 million for, but it's a movie I'd see opening weekend. That's for sure. So yeah,
I just watched her episode of The Bear and came to the conclusion that I think she is a good performer.
She's pretty good at her job, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Okay. PTA rankings. This is big.
Oh boy.
Sean, I'm going to kick it over to you. You're the guest first. You just want to go bottom to top.
Sure.
And,
I do this every year.
Does it move around a lot?
Yeah, sure. What does it really matter? It's all.
This is very important.
It's all content. Yeah, There Will Be Blood is number one. It's been number one for a very long time for me. Okay. It is a signature movie of my life. Jay, I think you were saying something somewhat similar. Titanic achievement, kind of definitional for me as a person, crazy as that may seem. Probably after that, I'll go The Master. I'll go Boogie Nights 3. I'll go Magnolia 4. Phantom Thread 5. Licorice Pizza 6.
Okay.
Inherent Vice 7. What am I forgetting? Punch Drunk Love 8. Hard 8. 9.
Yeah. Okay.
How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Sounds pretty darn good.
That's locked in.
There.
That's locked in.
Are you saying that the Smithsonian, or where is it going next?
It's actually going in a time capsule, and we're going to bury it underground just like Eli Sunday, and then we'll dig it up in like 20 years and see if it's changed. 20
And will it be
years?
crucified if it's the wrong order?
Well, yes, and you will have to profess for your sins.
Will it be bludgeoned by a bowling pin?
I mean, that's how we're getting it into the ground.
Let's just say you'll meet Daniel Plainview at the bowling alley. That's all you can say.
Got it.
Jay, your rankings?
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, obviously very difficult. Number one, I've got Junun, his music documentary.
I like Junun.
I like Junun too. It's good.
I think it's good.
I'm glad that PTA got to play with some drones. He loved those drones on that one. No, it's good. My number one is The Master. I think my number two is Boogie Nights. Again, this movie was the ultimate riser. This watch through. Inherent Vice is my number three. And then I definitely have a sense of you're trying to be too cool and you're trying to kind of reject who you are as a person. There Will Be Blood 4. But again, that movie to me was just like, it didn't have as much weight as I'm used to it having. It's still a masterpiece, to be clear, but fourth best PTA movie is still an achievement. Number 5, I have Phantom Thread. 6, Punch Drunk Love. 7, Magnolia. 8, Licorice Pizza, which feels rude.
Yeah, that's real rude.
And 9, the requisite hard 8 at 9.
Wow. Okay. I have a new number 1. It's changed for the first time in like 15 years. Phantom
Thread.
Phantom Thread's my number 1.
I had a feeling you were going to go there, Ryan, and I applaud you.
Yeah, it's a movie I watch. It's probably the most rewatchable PTA movie that I watch on rotation, and I just it's weird. Is it weird to say? This is gonna make me sound like Anne Hathaway in a Gone Girl quote. It's a very comforting film. It's a comfort movie for me, and I'm gonna be sending a lot of omelets this Christmas. There will be bloods too. Like Jay, you're just fooling yourself. It's number 2. We all know it. 3, Boogie Nights. It's a movie that's moved up and up and up over the years. 4, The Master. 5 is Licorice Pizza. I think it's tremendous, and I think it's weirdly gets topical more and more. Just as like society and how we treat women and everything. It's really, really smart. And
what also, great conversations that movie has inspired.
Yeah. And also just
of our best criticism.
Yeah. Just any like of the online discourse about it. It only fuels my love for it. 'Cause like people are fucking idiots. Inherent Vice is number 6. Really love that movie. These are all 5-star movies, by the way, at this point. Magnolia 7, because something has to be 7. Still love it. Punch Drunk Love, something has to be 8. Really like that movie a lot. We all agree Hard 8 is number 9, but like for Hard 8 to be your worst quote unquote movie, I mean,
you're doing okay for yourself.
You're doing pretty good for yourself. Your name's Paul Thomas Anderson, and you've got a pretty damn good filmography.
Yeah.
Is it like, yeah, I mean, like it's like up there with Fincher in terms of like probably the best rated filmography overall that I have like on a letterbox, you know, because there's so many.
I keep a pretty thorough spreadsheet when we do these movie series, and I think PTA surpassed Fincher for the highest average per movie.
Okay. Because, well, does that include The Killer?
That does include The Killer. Okay. I think Fincher was at like a 4.6 out of 5, and PTA was at like a 4.75 out of 5. They're good.
Yeah, they're pretty good at their job.
The head and the heart. That's what I think. Fincher and PTA. Those are my guys. The head and the heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to have you on down the road, maybe for Fincher conversation or somebody else. Sean, thank you so much.
Yes, it was my pleasure.
For being here.
Thank you so much, Sean. I had one more question for Sean.
Oh, yes. This is actually the most important question we have for Sean.
We didn't prep him for this. Which PTA character is most analogous to New York Jets quarterback Zach Wilson?
Probably Barry from Punch Drunk Love, right? Just kind of inept, emotionally repressed.
Who's the William H. Macy character in Boogie Nights?
Oh, Little Bill.
Yeah.
I mean,
close. That's a little harsh. I'm sorry, but
we're talking one day after the best game of Zach Wilson.
That's true. That is true.
It doesn't mean I love him in the way that I love all of Paul Thomas Anderson's characters, but he played well, and for that I will grant him Reed Rothschild.
Oh, well, that's nice.
Yeah,
but what happens?
Fitting number 2.
What happens next week when he fumbles 6 times and loses the game?
This has been a positive pod.
Yeah, if that happens, then he very quickly becomes Eli Sunday.
Okay, there you go. I've seen the tweet. I said he was Sean. I've seen the tweets. I know it's very Eli Sunday and bury you underground. Like it's
every Sunday. Yeah,
every Sunday is Eli Sunday. All right.
I said Rudy Blatnoyd, Martin Short in Inherent Vice. Just overdoing it. Just delusions of grandeur.
Pull your pants up, Zach. Jesus Christ.
Sean, can you tell everybody where they can find you and all your work?
Yes, I host a contemporary movie podcast called The Big Picture that you can find on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. We put out 2 episodes a week. Frequent co-host of the Rewatchables podcast, where we talk about older movies that you can't stop rewatching. You can find me on the Prestige TV podcast, where sometimes I recap TV shows, and then across the Ringer Podcast Network, where I am a sometime guest on many of our great shows. Thank you so much for having me on your show, especially to talk about Paul Thomas Anderson, whom you both know that I care about deeply. So I appreciate it, guys.
No, Sean, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, Jay and I both listen to your shows all the time. There's a sense of comfort for me, especially the drafts where you guys are yelling at each other. It feels like the holidays. And so just everybody that's not already listening to Sean's shows over at The Ringer, go ahead and go do so. They're the best shows out there on the planet. Jay, can you tell everybody where they can find you and all your work, sir?
Yeah. Leading with Letterboxd. That's what I do now. Jay Ledbetter on Letterboxd. On the old Twitter at Mr. J Ledbetter. Those are kind of it for me. But Sean, truly, thank you so much. Just to get sincere for a moment, like true inspiration for what we do. Like you are really good at it, and you make me want to do it more and better every day. So really, really means a lot that you came on. So thank you.
That's cool, Jay. Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. Ryan, nice to finally do this. I know we've been talking about it for a while.
We have, and it's been great and everything. And Jay, stop crying. I'm like, we're almost done. God, embarrassing in front of the guests. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd at Ryan McQuade 77. You can find all my work over at awardswatch.com. Podcast 5 stars, Spotify, iTunes, main show. That's on Mondays. This is on Thursdays. Starting next week will be our series over the films of William Friedkin. And Our first film will be The Boys in the Band. And we're looking forward to talking about Friedkin at the start of next year. So thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you all next time.